Everyone, welcome along to Digishift 66. So today we are exploring new AI tools, and we're going to look at the breakthrough in new technologies, everything from Stable Diffusion to ChatGPT. We're going to be joined today by three experts coming at very, very different angles at this. So we're going to have Hannah O'Rourke of Campaign Lab. Campaign Lab is a community of politically minded, progressive data scientists, researchers and activists. We're also going to be joined by Dr Irina Mirkina from UNICEF. She's focused on responsible AI, what it is and why we need it. She'll be bringing UNICEF's child-centred perspective, looking at if we develop technologies that work for children, they ought to work for adults as well. But the opposite is certainly not always true. And then finally, Lauren Crichton from Sana Labs, who's going to be bringing her expertise on the power of AI for workplace learning. She's also the sole creator and editor of Pass It On, which is a free bi-weekly newsletter designed to bring the tech and non-profit sectors closer together through knowledge sharing. I'd also encourage our speakers as we go, if there's any kind of links to kind of useful resources or any of your own websites that you want to pop in the chat box, please do that. It's always useful for our speakers. So we'll have three speakers, will be around 10 minutes each, and then the second half we'll have a chance for questions and open discussions around the room. You can also pop your questions as you go in the chat box, and Maddie and I will pick those up. And we'll make sure they're asked, so you don't need to unmute and come on camera if you'd rather not. It's totally up to you. So I'm going to pass over to Hannah O'Rourke from Campaign Lab. First of all, we'll hear from Hannah, and then we'll hear from our next speaker.
Great. Thanks for having me. I've got a few slides, which I will share now, which might be a good way to kick off. Oh gosh. You've already seen my, oh wait, hang on. Let's go back to the start. Okay. So yeah, hi, I'm Hannah, help run Campaign Lab, which is a community of progressive data scientists, technologists, activists who want to kind of innovate in campaigning, both political campaigning, but also more broadly. We do things like build tools, we run experiments, and we look at data-driven campaigning methods. So AI and campaigning. Roughly, I've kind of run about 5 different workshops with different kind of campaigning organizations. And the big thing is trying to think about, okay, these new tools exist, what kind of practical opportunities they offer for campaigners. And very much kind of these were practical sessions. And they were trying to kind of show that most people, when they're using these tools, are beginners. Like nobody's kind of an expert in this yet. So it's very much like, how can we as campaigners very practically use these tools, and how can they become part of our practice? And then there's a wider question, which I think is also very important, which is, should they be part of our practice? Which I'll go into a bit later on. So there are significant kind of ethical concerns, which I'm sure we can have a chat about today. Also, I'll kind of maybe leave it to the other 2 speakers to talk a bit more about that, because it feels more in their wheelhouse. But I'm coming from a perspective where I'm not saying that this is necessarily all a good thing. I think there are good and bad. But just want to kind of prefix it with that. So I guess quickly, how familiar is everybody with AI tools? Have people used it? We're talking kind of ChatGPT, Bard, all the other different kinds. Feel free just to put your hands up if you've used it. It'd be really good to get a sense of like how many people have a sense of it, who doesn't. It's okay if you don't. Cool. Okay, so a good mix. So to kind of like just start with SpongeBob. But the way in which we interact with these tools is something called prompt engineering, or prompting. So it's basically the command that you give these tools. So when you're trying to get anything useful out of these models, always think about what you're putting in. And the more sophisticated your prompt is, the more you're going to get out of it. So just to give you a really basic example, this was me using Midjourney. I asked for a cat sitting on a table in the style of a painting. So it gave me this image of a nice cat sitting on a table as a painting. Then if I change my prompt and say a ginger cat sitting on a table in cartoon style, it then gives me a ginger cat sitting on a table in cartoon style. So the way that you prompt the models affects what output you'll get. And it can get more and more sophisticated as you kind of build things like multiple prompts, chain prompting, all these different ways of kind of interacting with these models. So when we talk about AI tools, what are we actually talking about? Well, we're talking about things like Bing, don't know, you may have seen the interesting news stories about Bing running a bit wild and insulting people. We're talking about things like ChatGPT. We're talking about Google's just released Bard, I think, today. We're talking about things like Claude, which is made by Anthropic. And we're talking about things like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, which are image ones. So these are kind of the different tools. And again, I think Lauren's going to go into a bit more depth in how these tools actually work, which is great that you're handling that one because it is quite confusing. So what can these new tools do? Biggest thing they can do, particularly ones like ChatGPT, is text generation. So content generation. So if you're kind of a charity or a campaign and you're thinking about like generating content, this can definitely help you with what we call kind of blank page, where you're kind of sitting there, you've got a blank page and you don't know where to start. Like these are really useful tools just to generate ideas. So one really good example that we talk about a lot is this idea of like selling a new chocolate bar. This is an example of like a ways in which it could help you. So I asked it to give me some slogan ideas to sell a new chocolate bar called Jupiter, which is creme brulee flavored. This is a chocolate bar I wish existed. It does not exist. And it comes up with kind of 5 interesting slogans for Jupiter chocolate. Again, if I was running an advertising campaign about Jupiter chocolate, this would be my starting point. But what's really interesting is that you can start to personalize things. So for example, I say, make this slogan about Jupiter chocolate appeal to children. So I get out of this world with Jupiter creme brulee chocolate. Make it more exciting. Blast off to Flavor Town with Jupiter creme brulee chocolate. Ask it to appeal to an older man who maybe doesn't like new things. Experience a classic treat in a new way with Jupiter creme brulee chocolate. So you can already see that the more information you give the model about the audience you're trying to reach, the more it's going to tailor your content. And this is really helpful for when you're trying to campaign. But it can get a little bit dangerous. So this is just a quick experiment where we were trying to look at whether we could get it to generate a letter to convince an imaginary man called Dave to support climate change, like policies to tackle climate change. So we start off with a very kind of basic generic letter, which kind of is just like, here are the arguments for why you should support action on climate change. Next, we told it that Dave doesn't believe in climate change and votes Conservative, and asked it to then rewrite the letter in light of knowing these facts. Again, you start to say, it begins with saying, you know, I understand you might have different views. You might be concerned about this. It talks a lot about promoting economic growth and protecting children and grandchildren. Again, things that people who vote Conservative might be more aligned to thinking. So it's already started to tailor its response. What we then did was say, make the letter more empathetic. Again, it understands tone, so it can get empathy. So it starts to redraft the letter again, making it slightly more empathetic, saying, I can understand why you might be hesitant. And it starts to kind of do that, which is what a language model can do. Next, we use something, I don't know if you guys have heard of More in Common, but they have various like audience segments, which is basically information about different audiences that you might be trying to persuade. And this is one of the audiences they have called the Loyal Nationalists. And we basically put in the information from that audience segmentation into ChatGPT and said, Dave is like this. Dave, you know, reads the Daily Mail. Dave feels, you know, that Britain, you know, is important. He's patriotic. Write a letter to Dave saying why he should support climate change. And then we get this letter, which is even more kind of like targeted, using the information that we've given it from the audience to then redraft the letter. And then we went a bit silly and told it to do it in the style of Donald Trump. So gradually, as I am more prompting this model, I'm giving more and more information about Dave, and it's tailoring the content more and more. And actually, this letter is really quite funny to read. And again, it's saying why Dave should support policies on climate change, which is quite ironic because Donald Trump himself doesn't support policies on climate change. But what I'm showing you here, although it's a bit silly, is that this technology has the potential to target massively, understand psychological framing. I've tested it quite a few different things, including like moral foundations theory, and it's pretty good. Obviously, this has terrifying consequences for our politics, but also might be quite useful for people who are trying to do good in the world. So I'll leave that with where you think would be. So that's just the end of the letter. The other thing that it can really help with, so that's kind of content and framing, is workflow. So it has the ability to write emails. You can embed it into Google Sheets. It's quite good at coming up with ideas for tactics and event formats. So this was a good example that we worked through with an organization that was running kind of climate campaigns. And it was like, come up with some ideas in order to take on this evil oil based in France. And a bank was funding an oil pipe, and what's some ideas for like petition. And again, it was able to come up with ideas. We asked it to have a theory of change. It was able to understand theory of change and then add that in. So it's quite good for kind of like starting to think through ideas and tactics. The other thing that's quite useful is you can ask it to kind of draft a 6-step digital supporter journey. It will come up with 6 steps. Again, might start off quite generic, but the more that you put into the model, the more it'll kind of tailor those steps. So you could be like, explain step 1 more, or you know, take step 4 and expand on it. You can also ask it to start to think about, you know, risks of an action. So one of the things in this is doing an offline action, which was like a protest. It can go through the risks of what would happen if you're running that protest. Again, if you needed to write a risk assessment, I think this would be a good starting point. So it's quite a good tool for kind of like doing the things that in your job are the kind of things that might be the most boring parts as a starting point. So really practical, use this as a starting point. Again, quite useful. It can also start to think about metrics, which is quite interesting. You can ask it to come up with a measurement framework. Yeah, just on to the next thing. I'm very aware of time. Analysis. So one of the things that GPT is quite good at doing is you can put in kind of unstructured data and then it can add structure to it. So you can ask it to do sentiment analysis or keyword analysis. I put in a review for Avatar 2 and asked it whether it was positive or negative. It was able to tell me, yes, it's negative. Here's a summary. So it's very good at summarizing text. You can now actually install a something in your browser, a tool that allows you to kind of summarize a web page through ChatGPT, which is really easy. I use that quite a lot. If I'm like looking at a report and I need to like understand it quickly, give me summary and it will do that, which is great. And then there's also image generation. So again, these tools, usually Stable Diffusion or Midjourney, both quite easy to set up. Midjourney is a little bit more complicated, is quite good at like coming up with images. And again, like I think some of the images aren't quite where they are or they should be yet, but they're quite good for kind of thinking about concepts. So one of the things I've realized that when you're trying to like prompt this model, it makes you really think about the images you're using in campaigning, because actually before you just search for an image and you'd look at stock images and you just take the one that looks most relevant. Whereas when you have the capacity to create an image from scratch, it makes you really think, okay, what emotion am I trying to convey in this image? Concept am I trying to convey in this image? How is this content going to connect to my audience? So what's been really interesting is using the image generation software, because it's more complicated and more difficult to find the right prompt, is forcing campaigners to think more about what they're using and why. A good example is I was helping somebody who was working on transparency in Parliament. And we were like, what's a good image to kind of summarize what we're doing? Because again, transparency in Parliament, super vague, really hard to think of images. And we were like, oh, what about Parliament being a transparent glass box? That's not been done before. And normally we would have to like find a designer, take a picture, make a little model, do everything like that. But we could just ask Midjourney and it came up with these, which was not bad. And quite good when you're trying to communicate transparency in Parliament. So the image generation stuff, I think, is definitely changing the way people are practicing kind of campaigning more generally. And yeah, it can just do much, much more. You can write code, you can write poetry, you can analyze campaign data. There are some other tools. This is a slide that I'll share with you, which is just a load of tools and then a couple of libraries, which have like every single AI tool that is using this technology that's out there. I haven't gone through them all, but someone might want to and figure out what's most useful for different campaigns. So this is just a slide of like a collection of links which may be useful to people. And yeah, coming soon, there'll be stuff like music generation, video, lots of stuff. ChatGPT 4 is now out. Yeah, my friend generated an AI generated music album recently. It's got that far. Wasn't very good, but I mean, it's not bad. And yeah, the biggest questions for me are just like, at the moment, everything that's being built on top of this technology is being made for marketers. So the biggest question for me is like, how do we build tools that offer campaigners for people who are trying to do good in the world? Don't think that's quite happened yet. So if you've got any ideas on what kind of tools you would want built, that's something that definitely Campaign Lab and our community of like progressive kind of activists and coders would be up for kind of having that conversation. Yeah, and just some limits really quickly. It's not always right and it makes things up. Any tool is limited by its training data. For example, ChatGPT still thinks Queen Elizabeth is alive, which is a bit problematic. But basically its cutoff date is 2021. In the same way, there's massive biases and stereotypes in the training data. I put in the prompt, I'm half Irish. I put in the prompt of Irish man and I got this, which is just very much like taking on kind of cultural stereotypes. So be very aware that when you are kind of prompting for images, the default will be very much stereotypes and biases. And then it's up to you through prompting to try and get a different output. But that's the way the training data is currently, and there are definite problems with that. Limit 4, people are potentially working on tools that could detect if something is AI generated. So you might want to be really transparent about when you're using this technology, because that technology is coming. There's a bit of a kind of war going on between people trying to create stuff that detects it, then people trying to evade detection, and that's going to go somewhere. So just be aware of that. And limit 5, this is around prompt injection, but basically people have figured out how to get around like any safeguards on these models, because they are kind of just these massive models that are all in it. They're just like spotting patterns in text. So there are ways to kind of like get it to do things that are wrong. And that's a bit of a problem. And yeah, just some final thoughts about ethics. Obviously, there are huge implications for jobs, biases, transparency, manipulation, political manipulation. But I also think there's an opportunity for this to be quite democratizing technology. Like it gives people access to tools and resources that wouldn't have access to them before, might allow more people to do more. I think there's huge opportunities for smaller charities that have less resources to use this to kind of like improve what they're able to produce. And also, I think it's really important for people who are trying to do good in the world to know that this kind of stuff exists and to use it. So yeah, that's the end of some thoughts from me. Hopefully I didn't take too long.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hannah. There's some really good questions coming in the chat. We'll pick those up after the next 2 speakers. So our next speaker is going to be Lauren Crichton from Sana Labs, and she's going to be talking about AI for workplace learning. I know she's got some kind of live demos and other interesting stuff to talk about as well. So I'll hand over to Lauren just now.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to get my window set up here. Bear with me just a second. Hopefully, let's see. Can you all see my screen? Bright red, hopefully. So it's super nice to meet you all and be with you here today. I think that Hannah's given a great introduction, given the company and the area that I'm representing for you today. So I work for a tech startup called Sana, and we are using a lot of the underlying technology that Hannah has just described to help organizations be able to learn and share knowledge within their across their employees a lot more effectively. And I'm going to touch a bit on how exactly we do that and show you a bit of a live demo of the platform itself. But before, I just wanted to give a little bit more context on this kind of wild world that we're all seeing and experiencing right now. And I think, again, Hannah has touched a bit on this already, but obviously the public and corporate interest in AI is exploding right now. And that's largely as a result of this concept called generative AI, which is this type of artificial intelligence that can produce all these various types of content, like Hannah said, so everything from text and imagery to audio, etc. And these systems are able to do this because they use something called large language models. And these are computer programs that make it possible for these software systems to be able to understand and generate things from scratch. And as Hannah mentioned, probably the best, most popular recent example of this is ChatGPT, the product released by OpenAI late last year, which relies on a language model that has been more or less trained on the entire internet. So what it does is it's crawling through like billions of words from newspaper reports and policy documents, listicles, social media posts, etc., and taking all of that information and using it to create content that sounds as if you or I might have written it, and enables you to have a conversation with it. And it's become the fastest growing product in consumer history. So I think they had reached something like 100 million users within a couple of months. And as Hannah mentioned, organizations are now using tools like ChatGPT to kind of look for ways to increase productivity across all sorts of areas. So as you mentioned, anything from being able to debug some code if you're an engineer, to maybe you're in a sales team, you need some help suggesting an email that you want to send to your potential customers, etc. So there's a really, really wide and growing range of use cases. But I think the question that I wanted to answer right now is, how is it that AI has come to be getting so much traction lately, especially given that the theory of artificial intelligence dates back to papers that could be found, in the 1950s. We've had companies working on pretty advanced technology for quite some time. So why is it exploding now? And I think that there's kind of four main factors that are playing into this. One is the availability of data. So we're having more and more interactions in our lives in a digital context, and those tools are able to create more and more data, which then gives more data points for these models to be trained on. The second thing is computational power. So that's the chips that are powering the computers that are then we're using to train these algorithms and these language models. They are getting more and more powerful at a decreasing price. Then on top of that, you have algorithm advancements. So the research in these areas are advancing faster, which is enabling more and more use cases. And then last but not least, we have broader public interest. So with people taking understanding a little bit more, playing with these kinds of tools, there's then more talent available and potentially more interest and money then going into the AI area overall, which then creates and sort of powers all of these other areas that I just mentioned. So the combination of these four things is creating this kind of flywheel to accelerate the adoption and the impact of generative artificial intelligence. And if you thought that ChatGPT itself was already impressive, as Hannah mentioned, now OpenAI has launched ChatGPT 4, which is the model that can be used to power products like ChatGPT. And the kind of amount of data that these models are training on is just kind of growing exponentially. So here, this is just to show you a comparison of the difference in the number of kind of parameters that ChatGPT 3 was trained on versus ChatGPT 4. And the parameters are essentially all of these different historical data points that the model is used to be trained on. We've now reached the stage where we're seeing things like ChatGPT 4 being able to pass the bar exam in the US, which is kind of wild. That said, and as Hannah has already mentioned, these large language models are by no means perfect, and AI is only as accurate as the information that it's working with. So without the accurate training data on the right topic, the model might not create what it is that you're looking for. On top of that, the AI might not actually know that it's not telling the truth. And as Hannah mentioned, that obviously brings a certain amount of risk, particularly given the number of, or there's the volume of people that are trying and experimenting with these tools in the workplace. So here you can see that 43% of professional workers are using ChatGPT for work-related tasks, but almost 70% are doing so without their manager's knowledge. So it really means that as organizations, we need to be thinking about what kinds of governance do we need to have in place, what kind of transparency do we want to have within our organizations to ensure that we understand when we're using these tools, how we're using them, and why we're using them. But to circle this round now more towards why I'm here talking to you specifically, we've talked a lot about OpenAI just now. I think it's fair to say that companies like OpenAI, Google, and Amazon, they are going to both commoditize and also democratize access to these very large language models. But equally, on the other hand, there are startups and scale-ups out there, like the one I work for, who are trying to unleash the potential of these models and solve specific pain points, and to Hannah's point, also to create some good in the world. And in Sana's case, we are really focused on learning. And the reason why we're focused on this is because as a company, we believe that learning is the most important problem to solve, because if you can help anyone in any kind of discipline learn something faster and more effectively, you create essentially cascading benefits that ultimately and hopefully end up creating a better world for everyone. So that's what we're trying to do at Sana, and apply a lot of this technology to make that happen. And if we think about the way that organizations are learning and sharing knowledge today, there is big room for improvement. So, just as we're doing now, we're having an online conversation, we're talking and sharing information, sharing knowledge verbally. And after this call, if the call hasn't been recorded, unless lots of us have taken really, really good notes, a lot of the great insights and gems from this discussion might just end up being lost if we can't remember everything. So we've got knowledge that's getting lost because we're having more and more virtual conversations. We've also got knowledge that's getting increasingly scattered across more and more digital tools, everything from PowerPoint to Google Drive, you name it. There's all of these pockets of knowledge that are living across all of these different places, and employees might not always know where to go to find the right information that they need in order to do their jobs. And then lastly, but not least, we've also got knowledge that's trapped inside of people's heads. So many of us within organizations, we are subject matter experts. We have a lot of wisdom and knowledge to impart to other employees within the organization, but maybe we don't necessarily know how to impart that information. What is the best way to create an effective course that someone could take based on the knowledge that you have? So that's really the problem that we are trying to solve. And we believe that artificial intelligence is actually very good at helping us solve some of these problems. So to be able to capture some of that knowledge that might be exchanged verbally, to organize all of these different resources and documents that are existing in all of these different places, and then actually to be able to help individuals share what they know in a really easy way. And I'm going to show you a bit what that looks like now. Just very quickly on time, Ross, how many minutes do I have? Ish.
I mean, strictly speaking, none, but I would like to see this. So let's go for
okay, cool. Okay, great. But to give you a preface then, so we're using technology connected to things like ChatGPT, etc., to be able to essentially search across all of a company's tools really, really, really quickly. And then for any individual employee within an organization to be able to ask a question related to anything that's going on within their company that's available within any of these different tools. So you might want to ask a question about how your company's goals work or targets work, etc. And I'll show you in a second just what that looks like. We're also making it possible for people to share their expertise in a much easier way. So we have the possibility for everyone to be able to create courses in our platform and to use the artificial intelligence to actually generate a course outline for you based on the topic that you want to share, and then brainstorm with you, complete some of your sentences, create custom unique images based on all of those prompts that Hannah was just talking about, and hopefully be able to pass on your ideas in a more fast and effective way. We're also making it possible for organizations to be able to automatically transcribe their the meeting notes. So in a session like we're having right now, for our platform to be able to generate a summary of that live session for on everybody's behalf, and then for every individual employee within the organization to be able to just ask the platform at any time anything connected to one of these live meetings or sessions that they might have attended. So anything that they might have forgotten, the platform can help them get the answer and find it. And to hopefully put some of this to life, I'm just going to show you for a second here. This is our platform. I thought we could maybe generate a course outline now. So maybe we could do something like, has anyone got an idea for a course that they'd like to see? Could be anything from a course on penguins to campaigning.
What about
Someone had to shout it out.
AI for
course
campaigning.
on AI. Let's see here. Hold on a moment here. Okay, so I don't understand why this is not working. I don't know if it's got something to do with my screen sharing. Oh, this is such a disappointment when you do live demos and they're not actually working. Hold on, let me see if I can get this to work from here. But this is one of the courses that we have in our company about our company's tone of voice. And here I've written things myself about why a brand should have a tone of voice, etc. And I can just go here and I can ask the assistant here to continue writing for me. It's going to have a think and it's going to make some suggestions for me. So here it's just written a paragraph saying that brands need to take care of their voice so that it's consistent, recognizable, and authoritative. If a brand's voice is not consistent, it can confuse customers, etc., etc. I can then choose to edit this in any way that I like before I publish it and make it available. I can also ask it to summarize basically the entire page that I've written here for me and make that available in a different part of the course. And I can also, of course, generate an image here as well. Let's see here. Let's do cat, ginger cat sitting on a rock by the beach. And I can also choose the style that I want it in, whether I want it in oil painting style or something like that. And it will start generating, and I can then simply add that in. Let's see, I'm not sure why my course generation feature isn't working. Maybe the product team has done something to switch it off. So unfortunately, I can't show you that. But we have essentially made it possible for the AI to generate an entire course that you would want to share with your employees that includes interactive elements like polls and quizzes, etc., to make it a more engaging experience. But I'll stop there because I know that we're running desperately out of time, and hand back over to you, Ross.
Thanks so much, Lauren. That was great. And it just says, well, Lauren, if there's any links to any of that stuff that you want to pop in the chat,
sure.
people can grab those. Same to you, Hannah. So we're going to move on to our final speaker, and then we'll have a chance for a discussion. So Dr Irina Mirkina from UNICEF is going to be talking about responsible AI. And I think this is going to be particularly pertinent given some of the questions that have come in the chat box. That's a really good way to kind of finish up the three speaker slots. So I'll hand over to you just now.
Great, fantastic. Thank you very much, Ross. I'm going to try and speed it up as much as I can. But I think I'd like to start by thanking Hannah and Lauren by bringing up some of the benefits and also some of the challenges of the AI as we shift into this new era. Let me also share a few slides with you.
Just to say, while you're getting the slides set up, do please still take your full 10 minutes. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
So don't feel the need to rush through.
I will do my best. So let me start by saying that yes, generative AI has captured the world's imagination, and I think it's mostly because everybody, like literally everybody, can use them as long as they have the internet and access to the websites is not blocked by their governments. But the AI tools are part of our lives, like our everyday lives, and I have a few examples here. So video meetings right now, right here in this meeting, we have automatic captions which are done by an AI, and also if your background is blurred or changed in any way, that is a facial recognition algorithm running. All model cars issued after 2015, I would say, have some AI components in them. Energy efficient buildings have heating, water, electricity, everything is controlled by AI. AI helps us in drug discovery. Virtual assistants like Siri and Alexa are all over there. When you go shopping, if it's a large shopping center or online shopping, then inventory and prices are controlled by AI. And when you pay with a credit card, then your bank uses AI to prevent fraud and to track your transactions. Then obviously there is machine translation and all sorts of assistive techniques. There is generative AI. There is waste management. And my favorite example here is sorting plastic bottles. So the same company that dominates the global market for sorting plastic bottles and metal cans also uses just the same technology or the same kind of technology for sorting everything else from potatoes to diamonds. Then there are smart devices, smart watches, and other IoT techniques. And then there is surveillance and social media algorithms, which very much shape our world as we know them. Those are just everyday technologies. UNICEF as a human rights organization, just like to give you some context of why we're getting into this discussion, UNICEF is the children's fund, right? It's the United Nations Children's Fund. We work everywhere from humanitarian context and disaster mitigation to refugee to helping children's education and health. And our examples of AI include, again, a wide range of techniques from assistive technologies for children with disabilities to translation, which could help people understand each other across borders, to water quality control, to, again, the optimization of the logistics of the delivery of humanitarian aid, to preventing and mitigating the impact of natural disasters such as floods and droughts. And, you know, with the climate change, we are now engaging even in the countries where we did not think we would need to engage anytime soon. So AI, as you can see, has lots of benefits, and I'm not going to go into the wonderful benefits of generative AI because Hannah and Lauren have already done a fantastic job presenting that. But I want to highlight that generative AI presents a lot of risks. And some of them are very much specific to children, because children, in many cases, don't have the same world screening abilities. They don't have the same contextual knowledge about the world as adults do. In many cases, they cannot legally give consent to their data processing. So collecting the data about children, we get into this very difficult dilemma where we need the data, for example, for health screening, but we cannot collect the data if it endangers the child. So how can we mitigate all of them? And I want to give you a couple of examples which are very recent or fairly recent. And again, since we are talking about ChatGPT, I mean, what other examples would be better than that? So this one is every time when someone mentions that we should introduce chatbots as mental health companions, this is something that always comes to my mind. This is the response from the previous or the second to last version of GPT. This is GPT-3. But like to the question of whether I'm feeling bad and what should I do about it? ChatGPT is trying to be helpful, you know, it's trying to encourage you to do something, except it does not know what it's trying to encourage you to do. It does not understand what that means. So if there are no proper guardrails in place, it will kind of help you, not maybe in the way that you should be helped. But then again, some might say that, okay, this is the previous versions, no new versions are getting better and better. This is the version from just last week. So Snapchat, for those of you who are not on social media like myself, Snapchat is an application that targets children very specifically as one of their main audiences. And this is, they have added a power, or no, I don't remember how they call it, but it's AI chatbot as one of their main features in the app, within the app, so children can communicate with that. So a 13-year-old girl is encouraged to go on a surprise vacation with a 31-year-old man. And then we are talking about having sex and all other stuff. Again, the context of AI not understanding of what it's trying to suggest and trying to be helpful, for me, this is skin crawling bad, right? This is just the amount of risks that we are introducing when technology gets out of control, simply because we're very, very excited about using all of that. The technology is amazing. It's amazingly good. Look at how human-like text it produces. It's brilliant, except it's encouraging completely mind-blowingly bad things. So what can we do? Like, what can we as organizations, as people who work for different organizations, because it's not just UNICEF's responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility. So when we're talking about responsible AI, what do we mean? First, assume that all modern AI systems are biased by default, right? If they're not biased, then you have to prove that. They don't have enough knowledge about the complexity of the real world, because they only know what's in their data and they cannot imagine the all complexity. So if your data are incomplete, which is very much often the case with already marginalized communities like children with disability or people with disabilities in general, sexual minorities, about certain ethnic minorities, about races, and so on. When those people are already marginalized in the real world, those patterns, that marginalization will always come through in the decisions, in the output that AI systems are producing. Secondly, always ask who is human in your human-centered development. And if you don't have human-centered development, then you certainly should start thinking about who are you addressing. That's not just a user. That is not just a patient that you are talking to. It's not just a person you need to get some money for campaigning for. It's a person. It's a real person with their own struggles and emotions, and maybe they're going through a rough time. And maybe, just maybe, introducing new technology in their way may not have the intended effect. And the third, and probably the most important underlying principle, is to do no harm. And it's very hard to do, because in many cases we cannot anticipate. We try to model, but we cannot really predict in many cases what the output of those models would be. So I would want to finish with this slide. First of all, be very mindful of who is on your team, who is making the decisions, right? Who is, if you're creating texts with generative AI or images with generative AI, do you have a subject matter expert who knows the ground truth and can fact check what's in that text, right? Do you have your facts correctly, or can correct if that system is interacting with children or with marginalized communities, can check that that system does not have a detrimental impact on them? Do you have a human in the loop that can stop the system from doing more harm. If you have a system like customer facing or user facing AI system, do you have a feedback loop, right? Can user tell you that something is wrong, or can they only rage on Twitter and you only know about it after 10,000 users rage and like face Twitter wars and all of that? And do you have a mitigation plan? So if something goes wrong, and I'm not so saying if something goes wrong, probably I should say when something goes wrong, because something probably will. And hopefully it won't be big. Hopefully it will be just one maybe weird sentence in the middle of an otherwise fine article. But if something goes wrong, when something goes wrong, what is your mitigation plan? How can you make sure that the system doesn't make more harm than you would want it to have, or that you can afford to have? Thank you very much. That was my very rushed through presentation.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was amazing. Thank you to all three speakers. Actually, there's been some really, really interesting, insightful stuff, and there's been some really cool questions and kind of thoughts coming in from the chat. I'm going to, Dan, I don't know if you want to come in first, because I know that there's been some interesting stuff. You've been talking in the chat and answering lots of questions as well. Interesting stuff about particularly use of ChatGPT in a funding context in Scotland. It'd be interesting just to quickly hear about that. I'm sure we'll pick up more questions in the chat box too.
Sure. Yeah, just to go back to some of Hannah and Lauren's points, probably the main thing as to why in the last 6 months you're hearing nothing but AI on the news and on the internet is because it's only been the last 6 months there's been a practical use case for everybody to actually use AI. So all of the advancements that Lauren had mentioned before were good for scientists and researchers and highfalutin people who do things that we just don't understand when it comes to AI and computing. And it's now that it's filtered down to you know, the likes of us, or likes of me anyway, as a humble funder and manager and things like that, to be able to use these things. So, you know, within the third sector, you typically got the scenario of, and this is something I spoke at the YouthLink digital conference. We had 20 coordinators, managers, youth workers who are inundated and have got all sorts of demands on their time to do with social media, funding, staff development, 101 things. And what we were using was using AI in a practical way to help create some space for them to then look at the most important thing to do is about supporting young people. And by far, a lot of these charities spend over 50% of their time in front of a laptop writing grant applications. So what we did is we did a very practical exercise, and we took the questions from some of the lottery applications, grant applications, and we asked them to come up with an idea, or what Maddie would call your first failed draft in terms of developing an idea. And we took those paragraphs and we put that into the question, and we started to help them develop the prompt or the question. And ChatGPT is really great for it's being in a scenario and asking to take on a persona. So if you say, act as a grant manager of a national youth organisation and help me to answer this question from the lottery, which may be blah, 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 and you put in your paragraph, that then immediately does what you're asking it to do, because it's a computer. It will respond and give you a response and an answer. And then you consistently iterate that to refine it more and more as you go down. And then within, 10 minutes, we had an Awards for All application done and dusted that should normally take them maybe an hour or two to actually do. And so that was giving them a practical response. But what some of the conversations that have been really interesting around AI is about the risk averseness around about it. We don't want to be flooded with funders receiving lots of AI generated grant applications, and that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that you know, if I had written a draft application, I would take it to somebody who, one of my colleagues, and say, right, I've written this for this project. Can you give it a wee look over and see if there's anything that I've missed out or anything I'm doing? So you're using, to use Microsoft's word, that it's a co-pilot, it's another support, and then you put that through, and that will sort of redraft things or rewrite it. Again, I'm not a copywriter like Hillary is on this call, so act as a professional copywriter and rewrite this piece of text to make it sound better and pop out more than what I would do. So those are the kind of practical applications. So it's not being used as a method to cheat, where some people have got this idea where, I'm just going to get ChatGPT to write my grant application for me and then have no filter there at all. You've still got to put in the work, but at least it's kind of helping there to be a bit more efficient.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. That was really useful. And there was someone I was speaking to the other day from a children's charity, frustrated by the fact that they're, spending half the time writing applications rather than service delivery. They're missing out to bigger organisations that have entire teams of people doing this. So I think there's some merit in democratising and levelling the playing field of who has access to funds, and particularly funds where, having sat on plenty of grant panels, it's a lot of funders are still guilty of wanting things written in an exactly specific way, even though they're maybe not upfront about that. So for me, there's a massive potential to democratise. There's a massive potential. Someone mentioned the question there, point there in the chat about will we get in a place where people puts in a funding application written by AI, the funder then replies based on AI, and we get caught in this weird loop of AI. That's maybe a discussion for another day. I'm just kind of conscious of time, and there's a question. I don't want to kind of dwell too much on that stuff just now. We've got about 6 minutes left. There was a really interesting question that Janet made about service delivery and AI, and particularly in Janet's context, obviously managing reach volunteering. So, how do people apply for volunteers? How do we manage the volunteer process? I'd be interested from that kind of service delivery perspective, if Hannah, Lauren, or Irina, if you've got any things that you want to kind of come in with that, on that.
Yeah, so I think it's a good question. Service delivery, it's the potential for this is so great in the sense that kind of you can have a conversation with an AI and it can kind of figure out what's most useful for you. The problem is that, and again, this was highlighted in Irina's presentation, these models do not have safe rails on them, and any safe rails that you attempt to put on top of them to create a kind of more effective chatbot can be undone or undermined by just asking the AI to take on a different persona. So because there's no and again, lots of my people I know have been working on this problem for different startups and stuff, and they're constantly trying to stop this idea of prompt injection, which is where you're asking it to do something inappropriate, which people do that. The internet is full of people trying to do that. So when you're trying to think of anything to do with safeguarding children, anything like that, I would stay away from this technology because those safe rails are not there. They absolutely are not, and I don't even know how you put them on. I don't even think the people making the thing know how to put those on. So yeah. I think with service delivery, there's some potential. Also, yeah, some causes there too.
Irina, do you want to comment on this one?
I just want to add a very quick comment. So Microsoft has unveiled their plans. They are going to add GPT-4 into all of their Office programs. So what now you can do with the chatbot, soon you will be able to do from within your Word or Excel and Outlook, and then it will try to accumulate all the documents that you have. It can create tables, it can summarize your emails, it can put together everything. So Microsoft is making your jobs easier very much, but the risks are still there. So I for the funding applications, for the campaigning, for all of that, creating drafts, it will become much easier because it will have access to pretty much all of your documents on your computer, and it will be right there within your document folder. But the actual effects, like Hannah said, the actual effects we will see how much you have to be aware of the risks at every single step.
Yeah, and to just build on that quickly, it's a similar thing in our platform that you can search kind of for anything. It'll look across all of your company's apps, but it will only search through the things that you give access to, and it will only search through the things that you can see. So, for example, if I connect the platform to my Slack and to my Google Drive, etc., that does not then give me access to the entire company's private direct messages that are taking place in Slack, because as a person in Slack using that tool, I would not have access to those kinds of messages, etc. And that's one of the ways that you can, at least from an organizational perspective, feel reassured that the technology isn't going to expose something that would otherwise have been or should have been kept private.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for your insights on that. Maddie, any questions in the chat you'd like to bring out? Any interest in?
I think the basic one is right at the start, which about how much do these things cost and are they free and what do we do with them? I think was right at the start, that very first. I can't remember who said that because there's been so many questions, which is great. But that was, what do they cost? Are they free?
Yeah,
that kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting actually if hear from
Anna. It was Anna.
Yeah, on that concept, I guess, of free and what is truly free, and then where is there merit in paying for some of this stuff. So that'd be interesting to get some insights on that. Anyone fancy jumping in first on that?
If you want to find out about lots of free AI tools, my recommendation, as I put in the chat to one of the directly, was to go on TikTok. TikTok is a great source for going on and finding out lots of AI tools. So if you want to do AI tools for generating all of your social media and automate it so with images and fire it out there, loads of tools. If you want to do ones on presentations like Tome, again, go on TikTok. But I use it as a search now. I don't even use Google anymore.
Yeah, just add to that, those libraries that I've put on those slides, like you can do a filter which is like free tools or paid for tools. But in terms of the big tools, GPT is free. You can pay for a paid version, which is less, like it breaks down less because there's just so many people using it. Midjourney is free to a certain extent, and then it charges you. Stable Diffusion is free. Those are the kind of biggest ones. Obviously, Microsoft Bing is free. The Bard by Google is free at the moment, but it's behind a wait list at the moment, so I don't know how soon that will be. But yeah, most of these are free from the big tech companies. But again, you have those questions about data. But yeah, depends.
Right. Thanks. I'm gonna finish us up there because I'm conscious of time. It's 11. I know lots of people have got meetings starting at 11. What I'm going to do as well, Lauren will be on. She's going to be able to kind of demo. I'm going to hand over host to Lauren. So if anyone wants to stay for the demo that didn't get a chance to do, you can stay on with Lauren. Thank you so much for coming along. If you go to the SCBO events page, we will have another Digishift coming up in April. We're going to be exploring content design at that one. We've got an interesting speaker lined up. We've also got on the Third Sector Lab website, we've got our Digital Trustees event coming up in April. What I would urge you to think about is like who at a governance level in your organisation is taking responsibility for any of this stuff. If you don't have someone, maybe it's time to recruit the right person. Right, thank you so much for all coming along. Thanks to our speakers, Hannah, Lauren, and Irina. That was amazing. That was like one of the best Digishifts we've had. So that was so good. Thank you so much. Brilliant. We shall see you all soon. And just say as well, the recording goes on the SCBO YouTube channel very soon.